DL Hughley's back on the channel. We had him we had a clip of his on a little bit ago, and a bunch of viewers told me about what he's been up to since then, and I've been watching him. I do want to stress, though, before I play this video, he does. Oof, this really is interesting. He does not only talk about race issues. He talks about all kinds of issues. I almost used him as a jumping off point for talking about the House vote, but then, of course, as with everything, tech problems got in the way. But here he is talking about Dana White and a recent development that occurred in Dana White's life, and also how the media covers it. It was a little eye-opening for me.
That was Donnell Jones. You know what's up. So the way a story is perceived by the public is directly dependent on how that story is told. Case in point, the middle of last week, Dana White, who is the president of the UFC, there was a video of him circulating where he and his wife had a physical altercation. Now, she struck him. He struck her a lot of times. My question isn't about who was at fault. My question is about why it took the media so long to cover such an event. I remember seeing the video, I think early Saturday night or early Sunday morning, and no one, even in the sports world, covering it until that Wednesday. Can you imagine if that event had played out and it had been Chris Brown or Antonio Brown or Bobby Brown? The media not only they wouldn't have been able to stop talking about it. But the fact that the first time we heard about it on the sport, the first time I heard about it, Stephen A. Smith talked about it, and he prefaced his whole story.
Stephen A. Smith breaks my heart whenever he talks about non-directly sports-related issues, every single time, because he's such a charming man, and he has some of the worst takes I've ever heard on TV.
The lead up to the story with extolling the virtues of Dana White. Have you ever seen somebody who had just had a physical altercation on television, on video, get their credits and their humanitarian virtues read out before you got to the gist of the story? It never happens that way. Because generally, and I think the young woman who co-hosts with Stephen A. Smith, I'm not going to judge anybody on their worst day, but the media often does that. I remember on ESPN, a young man who had a fight, I forgot what sport it was. They went back at it when he was 16 years old and told us, how violent he was. So the media is complicit in shaping stories based on their biases or perceptions.
Okay, so I'm somewhat torn on this one. On the one hand, being totally clinical about it, my initial thought is I would like to hear the media waiting and getting all the facts and assuming the best and taking into account that his wife hit him first and yada, yada, yada. On the other hand, he is right. If it weren't Dana White, if it were Charles Barkley, I suspect this would be covered very different. I suspect it would have been front page. Instead, I heard about it first from DL Hughley. Now, I've gone out of my way not to look it up, even though I'm very curious, because that's the point I wanted to stick with. I heard about it first from a guy talking about, let's call it Dana White privilege. That's unfortunate. I had someone earlier mention, though, I talked about how the internet is, by and large, good for progressives. It makes more people progressive because there is more access to information. I suspect in the bad old days before I could see a clip like that from Mr. Hughley, I would never have heard about this. I offer that only as an optimistic take, but let's let the man finish. Because as usual, he's concise and he's killing it.
I don't know who started that fight. I do know this, that if that had been anybody else doing that, that we would have heard about it ad nauseum. And there would have been people interjecting ad nauseum. We're not talking about some athlete. We're talking about the president of a major sports franchise. Can you imagine Adam Silver or Roger Goodell doing that? Because that is how the media shapes narratives. We know about Ray Rice when he does something. We didn't know at the same time Ray Rice was accused of domestic violence. There was a Alabama Superior Court justice who beat his wife in front of the police, and he still sits on the bench. We know about athletes' drug use, but we don't know. We hear that ad nauseum. We don't hear about the owner of the Colts who has a car trunk full of drugs. We know about Deshaun Watson's massages, but Robert Kraft, who owns the Patriots, was caught in a sex trafficking ring. So that is how the media is complicit. We know about the Boston Celtic coach having an affair, but we don't see a man who's the president of the UFC having a physical altercation with his wife. And let me just say this. And do you ever see the media giving a story, extolling the virtues of somebody before they tell a story about somebody having a physical altercation with their spouse? Because the media has a vested interest on how we see things, how we perceive things, how we feel about things. Because these guys make a mistake. These guys are criminals. These guys are deviants.
There it is.
It shapes, even the term black on black crime comes from the media. It comes from the Chicago Defender. Somebody said in the story, the media took it and ran with it, and now it is a part of American lexicon. That is how they shape narratives. Why do you think it is that very rich men want to own media outlets? Why do you think that is? So they can tell a story and shape a narrative, and they tell you how you should see you and you should see events. So not the old adage, "To the victor goes the spoil," is not as apt as whoever has the camera tells you what to believe. That's a little note from the GED section. We got the Jazz Report coming up in 15 minutes.
So D.L. Hughley, once again, just crushing it. Absolutely crushing it. I do not know how I missed the last 20 years of this guy. I would have loved to have been there for the whole journey from him going from a relatively, I don't know, B-list comedian to, now he was A-list. Debate in the comments, or correct me in the comments, certainly. But to where he is now, which is a guy that is so plugged in to, in my opinion, exactly where we go wrong as a society. Fascinating. Love that we got a strong voice out there telling it as it is, frankly. But I do want to clarify. I think a lot of people hear that and think that what progressives want is for, Dana White to have a worse day. And that isn't necessarily so. It's that we want equal treatment for everybody. It's frustrating. Take, for example, the case with Weisselberg, where I specifically said a rich man should get a harsher crime. Well, because he's in the gang of rich. Because this guy has demonstrated he had more to work with. He had longer to do his crimes before there was any consequences. I want to see these people treated no different than the kid caught with a bag of cocaine. You shouldn't be walking around with a bag of cocaine. but you shouldn't be treated like an animal because you work. You should be treated like what you are, which is a guy with a drug problem. If you're Alan Weisselberg, you shouldn't be treated like a prince who's down on his luck. You should be treated like a guy that defrauded the United States government and thereby the American people for years and years and years. If you're Dana White, as I said, I don't know the specifics of his situation. But I shouldn't have to hear about Dana White's altercation only because its lack of coverage was compared to the coverage of all the other people's altercations that I did hear about immediately by multiple sources. The double standard is not acceptable. And earlier, as I was saying, I talked about how the internet has been good for progressives. Plain and simply, it's because of moments like these. It makes it easier, if you're willing to look, to see into other slices of life. It also makes it possible to utterly seal yourself off. But most people, from other slices of life, but most people don't seem to make that decision. There's a conversation to be had about algorithms. There's a conversation to be had about internet literacy, certainly. But by and large, the accessibility of information is going to make double standards like this harder to maintain. That is good. I'm going to keep watching D.L. Hughley. I'm going to make an effort to make sure the next time I feature a clip of his on the show, it's not talking about race relations, because we've had two in a row, and this guy talks about all kinds of things. I don't want to give a skewed view of his content. But I'll tell you, I haven't heard him miss yet. Watched about 10 D.L. Hughley clips. Been right on point for every one.